Колеги, доброго дня. Дякую, що прийшли в недільний день сюди до нас. Зараз я до слова запрошую пана Рефата Чубарова. Він є головою Меджлісу кримсько-татарського.
We will talk with Refat Chubarov on the civil blockade of Crimea, our first results of this blockade and the plans for the future. Refat Chubarov is the head of the Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people and MP, Ukrainian MP. Good afternoon, everybody present. I want to start with the gratitude for the fact that you came here on Sunday. I'm very, very grateful for your attention to the issues that we will talk about. So we will talk about citizens' blockade of Crimea, preliminary results and further actions. You remember that it was at the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center on the 8th of September, Mustafa Jamilov, Lenur Islamov and myself declared the initiative on the holding of the citizens' blockade of Crimea, and within several days we have named the date of this event, and on the 20th of September the citizens' blockade of Crimea began, and then many journalists and experts asked us for how long it will last, and we answered, and this was our sincere answer, that this could last for a month, for 2 weeks or whatever, because we are ready to many formats. As of today, the citizens' blockade has lasted for 71 days or 2.5 months. I'll tell you in brief about the tasks of the action as they were formulated by the organizers. And these demands were confirmed by the headquarters. It was on the second day of the action, on the 21st of September, because there were quite a lot of people who took part in the organization of this, in the organizing of this event. They represented a lot of organizations and formations, so in the statement that they adopted on the 21st of September, there's a series of aims: the efficient protection of rights and freedoms of Ukrainian citizens who live on the territory of the temporarily occupied Crimea, immediate stop to the discrimination of discriminatory politics towards citizens of Ukraine and activists of the Crimean Tatar people, immediate release of political prisoners, including Ruslan Zaytulayev, Nuri Primov, Rad Zaytulayev, Nadia Savchenko and Oleg Sentsov. Also, the removal of the ban for the leaders of Crimean Tatar people, Mustafa Jamilov, and head of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people, the closing of falsified criminal proceedings. I want to tell you that as of today we have the following. As there was a demand to cancel the law of Ukraine on the creation of the free economic zone Crimea, I can tell you that the government has prepared and agreed with all the stakeholders the draft law of Ukraine on the limitation of delivery of some goods, works and services from the temporarily occupied territory to Ukraine and vice versa. Yesterday I also agreed in the form in which this resolution was prepared, the position with the Ukrainian government, and with the adoption of this resolution, trade and delivery of goods is stopped altogether, both from the territory of Ukraine to the temporarily occupied territory, and this means both Crimea and other territories that Ukraine does not control today. Also, there are parameters, and for those who are interested, I'll tell you that any person can move socially significant goods to the tune of 10,000 hryvnia, not more, and where the total weight is not more than 50 kilos per one person. Besides, there are some cases when the goods can cross the administrative border. This is when humanitarian help is being transported, which is provided by international humanitarian organizations, and also the issues of electricity transferred by the electric grid from Ukraine to the formerly occupied territories is not covered by this resolution. There is a need for special documents. We think, according to our preliminary agreement, that this document will be adopted on Wednesday at the sitting of the government, and from this moment the blockade will actually, and the stoppage will actually become a de jure action, and this is one of the results of the action of the civil blockade of Ukraine, of Crimea. But I'll tell you that participants in the citizens' blockade will retain their posts, their checkpoints everywhere where they are. They will check the performance of this document, but of course they will be closer to Ukrainian customs officers and bodyguards, and they will monitor the execution of this resolution so that it is being adhered to. So from this moment on, I proceed from the notion that as soon as this resolution becomes valid, the participants in the citizens' blockade will not any longer inspect the cars and other vehicles that go through the administrative border. They will monitor how those who have the authority to do this actually perform their duty. I'll tell you that there's a lot of different thoughts and ideas about the trade, and for these 2.5 months we had an opportunity to get to know a lot of ideas about this action, and I won't repeat or I won't discuss and discussed the argument that the stoppage of the trade hits the budget of Ukraine. If it was hitting the budget, then of course there won't be the free economic zone where almost all the profit is gained by those who do trade. Since the 20th of September, we stopped the work of a huge shadow pump, because of which a great number of goods, first of all foodstuffs, were transported from the continental Ukraine through Crimea to continental Russia. This was provided for by the flow of cash that were finding their place in hands on both sides. And this was a great rust of corruption in which hundreds and hundreds of people were involved, including public officers and law enforcers. We have stopped this, but for me, the main thing is that we stopped an opportunity for the occupational authorities to pay the bandits, the so-called formation People's Militia of Crimea, whose bandits are breaking into our houses, who are assaulting people, and who are guilty of the fact that dozens of young Crimean Tatars have vanished, went missing. So this is one of the blows against the occupational authorities and those Ukrainian public officials who were involved in these bandit schemes. Since the 22nd of November, the electricity from the continental part of Ukraine was no longer delivered to Crimea, and members of the blockade, activists of the blockade, wanted to realize this instrument as well. There were rather complicated relations with the Ukrainian officials who wanted to provide for this. However, we proceeded from the fact that since the first days of occupation, the representatives of the occupational authorities of Crimea have every day said that they are prepared for any blockades from the Ukrainian side, and they said to the entire world that they are prepared to face this situation as well. But the participants in the citizens' blockade of Crimea decided to protest against this as well and see how this influences the occupational authorities in Crimea. And it's been 2 weeks now since electricity delivery was stopped to Crimea. And these 2 weeks have demonstrated a limitless and full greed of the occupational authorities. It turned out that a lot of generators and other equipment that had to be stationary and had to provide electricity was embezzled and was stolen since the first days since it started to be transported to the peninsula. And there are dozens of scandals now in Crimea linked to the fact that the statements of the occupational authorities were in fact meant to cover the stealing and robbing policy of the occupational authorities. We considered that non-delivery of electricity from the continental authority, Ukraine, will just stimulate the preparedness of the occupational authorities to provide for the supply of the people that they control on the territories that they control. However, these issues have provoked a discussion both in Ukrainian society and many different approaches with our foreign partners, but everyone saw that the occupational authorities, while having electricity in the volume that actually allowed them to provide for people, they delivered this electricity first of all to military units. And here are the official data from the so-called emergency headquarters of Yevpatoria city, when one of the officials said that they have something like 17 kilowatt of electricity, and however five of those megawatt are taken by the military units, and they do not have, local authorities cannot switch military units off. This is just an example of whatever figures you may get from that side. It is absolutely proven that 40 to 50% of the electricity that is generated there or is transported there goes to military units. Moscow, while trying to save the image of the person who issued first orders about the intervention of the Russian troops, I mean President Putin, Moscow made everything to lower the dissatisfaction of people and to avoid losses of image. Yes, really within a rather short term, they did throw an electric cable and they are now selling the electric energy. They are delivering electricity with the help of this cable. However, if you try to analyze the situation proceeding from Moscow or occupational data, you won't be able to see the real picture. In short, there are 4 heat energy stations in Crimea, and these 4 stations generate up to 100 megawatt. This is one of the directions of generation. They've brought 13 huge movable generators. 5 of them work, and every one of them gives 22.2 megawatt. So they produce over 100 megawatt of energy. They insist that the cable that they laid in the Kerch isthmus provides 300,000 kilowatt. However, they have breakages there, and in the very system of delivery, if they will lay another cable, they still won't be able to provide for the entire territory of Crimea, as they have to build a additional line between Kerch and Feodosia in order to have all this in circle. And now I go back to our actions. I want to tell you once more that as you see a number of demands of the people who organized the citizen blockade, they are not have not been fulfilled, and we did understand that it was impossible to see the fulfillment of them within the totalitarian foundations of the authorities that there is in Russia. The demands are still not just fulfilled, they demonstrate their open non-acceptance of our demands. I can remind you of today's events that they tried to stage in Russia, of, for instance, long haulers, drivers of lorries who tried to protest in Moscow on purely economic issues. However, they do not go to meet the demands of their citizens, although this is risky as far as the social calm and peace is concerned. At the same time, I want to insist and I want to draw your attention to the fact that the event, the action started on the 20th of September, and its latest stage that started on the 22nd of November, when the delivery of electricity was stopped. This action has returned the Crimean topic and the issue of Crimean Tatars and the issue of Ukrainian citizens were returned back to the Ukrainian political agenda. I could tell you a lot about all the consultations and meetings that I and Mustafa Dzhemilov had, and we can talk about presidents of some of the countries and the ministers for foreign affairs, some ambassadors accredited in Ukraine, and we have talked a lot at every meeting about the demands connected to the citizens' blockade of Crimea. We insisted on our vision, and one of our proposals was that the topic of Crimea should be again present at every forum where they talk about the issue of relations with Russia, including where we talk about Minsk agreements. There should be a special contact group composed of high officials of those countries who were guarantors of the Budapest Memorandum. Yesterday I talked to this with Her Excellency, the Ambassador of the UK. I talked about this to Ms. Mogherini when she was in Ukraine. Mr. Dzhemilov has talked about this with the ministers of foreign affairs of OSCE, and I must tell you that we do find some understanding, although everybody understands how difficult it will be to realize. Soon the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people will conduct here our meetings with the heads of diplomatic missions who are accredited here in Ukraine, and we will soon again talk to them about the form and the way that the institution should be formed, which together with our country, with Ukraine, will not only proclaim its worry about the violation of human rights in Crimea, but would also insist on the necessity of a dialogue about the return of Crimea. I understand how hard this will be, at least because you know the approach of the Russian side. As soon as the topic of Crimea starts to be discussed, they just stand up and walk away, because they say, this is our territory, why should you discuss it? I would say that we cannot but take this into account, and the organizers and the initiators of the civic blockade of Crimea as well. I met recently those members of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people who are here in continental Ukraine, and we adopted a relevant decision. Yesterday, Mr. Dzhemilev and I met the Ukrainian president, Mr. Poroshenko. We had deep-going discussions on many issues, and we arrived at a deep understanding, about which I'll tell you now. The aggregate demand for electricity in Crimea amounts to 1,150 megawatt, and over the last year, something like 850, 900 megawatt was delivered from Ukraine, and this was enough for them within the conditions of the fall of economy, of the lack of manufacturing activity under the conditions of sanctions, and it was enough for them to provide for their existence, including provision of needs of military units. And such continuation, we think, just cannot happen anymore, proceeding from any motivation, moral, political, or military. Maybe I give in this way an answer to my colleagues in the parliament who insist that the delivery of electricity should be restored to the full capacity. We, Crimean Tatars, are very much offended by the argument that are being quoted by politicians, including my faction, the Petro Poroshenko bloc, who say something like this: we understand the pain of Crimean Tatars, we understand that they want to free 7 Crimean Tatars, but you know, this is not about releasing or freeing 7 Crimean Tatars. It's about the return of Crimea to the fold of Ukraine. You know, when today I was getting prepared for this press conference, I looked at the brochures prepared by my colleagues, and I'm looking at these faces. These are Crimean Tatars who, during the first days of occupation, voiced their support for the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Ukraine should not forget about them as much as it should not forget about any other people. If we are talking about the return of the territory, about the return of people, hundreds of thousands of whom remain loyal to Ukraine, we have to develop a strategy which today is possible as far as the delivery of electricity is concerned. Yesterday we talked for a long time with the president. Before this we talked to the Prime Minister, and we, the participants in the blockade, can see in this a compromise, or even not the compromise, but this continuation of the citizens' blockade of Crimea, which will inspire our foreign partners and friends to be more serious about the work of the international mission to Crimea, so that our foreign partners are better interested in this, so that we avoid some economic and other negative results, for instance, for Kherson and Kherson region. The matter is that all the electricity grids were built during Soviet times, and they were changed little over the years of independence, and it happened so that the stoppage of delivery of electricity along one of the branches threatens the delivery of electricity to up to 30,000 people who live in Kherson region. And there are other places where they dangerous objects, and they need special regimes that are being provided by the electricity delivery, and we understand that no one can assume responsibility for delivering electricity in the volume that it was delivered before, because this, I tell you once and once again, means delivering electricity to Russian military units that actually occupy the territory. Yesterday we talked to Mr. Lenur Islamov, to Mustafa Jamilov, and all those who take part in this action of now there are 4 lines: Kakhovka Titan, Kakhovka Ostrovska, Kakhovka Jankoy, Simferopol. They all are out of service now, and we only agreed to restore Kakhovka Titan electricity line. And participants in the blockade are now agreeing that, taking into account the motives that I talked about, and I'm withholding some of the opinions because this is connected to the energy security of our country as a whole, and it is also linked to security issues and the issue of energy security. There's a question why there is just one line that we are ready to restore the electricity delivery. This is the only electricity line which won't raise the amount of the electricity delivered. All the rest of the lines, Kakhovka-Ostrovskoye, Kakhovka-Dzhinkoi, and Melitopol-Dzhinkoi, can deliver up to 600,000 kilowatt. And if Kakhovka-Dzhinkoi, for instance, is restored, then the occupying forces can suck out up to 800,000 megawatts. So we decided that, and this is also dangerous because there may be an overheating there, but I still think that we will have some technical issues there. I want to tell you once more that there were some very, very heated discussions about this. We take into account the motives of all the sides involved, the Western partners, the leadership of the country, people from different branches of economy of Ukraine, the interests of people who live both in the continental part of Ukraine and those who live in Crimea. But what's going to happen in Crimea if those 220 megawatt go there? Including the fact that they do get some energy from Russia. If they want, they will be able to, and taking into account the electricity generated in Crimea, they will be able, if they want, to provide for all the demands and requirements of the peaceful residents. Pumps, sewage, water. However, we regret to think that they won't do this. They will again deliver a great part of this electricity to garrisons and military units and all the machinery that they have in Crimea. But we think that this is the issue that we cannot control, we cannot influence it, and it will, of course, be reflected in the attitude of people who have to live in Crimea, including also those who were sympathetic to the intervention by Russia and those who have not accepted and will not accept this intervention. I have told you almost everything. One of my colleagues yesterday said, when we were discussing this, that we should stress that this is the evidence of our respect to those who live in Crimea and of those people who are guilty of invaders coming there. We tell everyone that such our step is another evidence of non-violent principles of the actions of the Crimean Tatar national movement. And then my colleague said that to some extent this may influence the just attitude towards political prisoners and hostages who were imprisoned in violation of all the norms and all the laws, who are now in the prisons run by the Federal Security Service of Russia in Crimea. Although I understand that any goodwill on the side of Russia's neighbors or partners, whoever displays it towards Russia, Putin regards this as a weakness. And in this situation, I want to tell you, we are strong. We continue the civil citizens blockade. We will reformat it. We will still insist that the issues of relations between continental Ukraine and occupied Crimea will acquire the legal character And in this respect, I tell you that from the very first days of the session that will start next week, we will talk, we will ask, and we will demand from our colleagues that any agreement and treaty, whichever sphere it is prepared for, where Crimea is mentioned, that Ukrainian side could sign these treaties only if it mentions the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, Ukraine. In this way, I warned the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine and our top officials that in the parliament we as MPs will do everything to the effect that the contract on the electricity delivery for 2016 won't be signed in a limited way on the electricity line Kakhovka-Titan if this treaty or contract does not contain a clause on Crimea being part of the Ukrainian state. And then we'll look at all the MPs of Ukraine to the extent to which they understand their own interests and care about the interests of the state and citizens. And I do not exclude the situation that if, God forbid, some document is signed which prolongs this situation and it will again contain a clause on the Crimean Federal Territory, then I would want all Ukrainians to understand and feel the responsibility for the future of Crimea, not by just part of this society. I will then ask people to come to the parliament, to come to the cabinet of ministers who will trade and exchange our territory. Any questions? Please introduce yourself. Natalia Baluk, Channel 1 TV. About the sea blockade, there was a statement that it's being launched. Is it right, and what actually was in mind? Lenur Islamov initiated this event. We have talked a lot about this. There are some things we are prepared to do, but I'm not sure that we should talk about this. We have to insist on the situation when the territory of the peninsula, and when I say the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, I should also add and Sevastopol, but because we have two administrative units there. But everybody who lives in Crimea, when we mention the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, we do not think of it as a partial, as some parts of the entity. I think that the entire territory of Crimea should be under embargo, which is not easy because this is done through the United Nations organization. But we are now talking to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine so that they insist that no ship and no airplane enters the territory of Crimea. This is the blockade. This is the blockade when the neighbors are not just warned but when this is banned. Some of our colleagues say that they are looking at the experience of the Greenpeace organization. We'll see. I don't want to tell you much about the fact that not only electricity links the peninsula to the continent, there are some other services that can be stopped, and this also can be felt, but mostly by ordinary people, because, for instance, state bodies can provide themselves with the novel technology. In fact, all the internet provision comes from the territory of Ukraine, but if this is stopped tomorrow, then those quasi-state bodies will install their own internet equipment. But here, of course, is the issue of the information security. Tomorrow, Vice President of the USA, Joe Biden, comes to Kiev. Do you plan to meet him, and what are you going to talk about to him? Well, there will be several formats of meetings of Mr. Biden. I know that our young colleagues, MPs, will meet Mr. Biden. At the moment, we have very close relations with different embassies, including the Embassy of the USA. I know that some protocol issues have not been agreed yet, and I can't tell you whether I will meet him or not, but we are working on this. Any other questions, colleagues? Could you tell us about the electricity line? You said that one may be restored, but what about the other three? Will they be restored or will they stay ruined? And about the automobile blockade, when will it be stopped? Look, I may tell you in a diplomatic way so that no one gets offended as far as state bodies are concerned, like police or customs or bodyguards and representatives of local authorities, but we were shocked with different chicanery and when we started the blockade, because there was unlimited trade. This all has been stopped, apart from the manufacturers' interests or those who in Crimea were getting a lot of cash. There were also interests of those who were responsible for doing their duty on the administrative border, at the administrative border or in their offices. Now they feel that they have suffered as well, those people. We have stopped this, but it is not possible to drag the roots out, to uproot it. And we are thinking that on Wednesday there will be a resolution, a government resolution, which regulates the parameters of what's allowed, and this already limits the scope of corruption activity. And at one moment, the participants in the blockade will be present, monitoring the actions of customs officers and bodyguards and some bodies of power. This is not a direct interference into procedures, because there were different situations. I won't be able to name the date at the moment, but I can tell you we will stay there for long, and maybe we will stay there for ever. Because I can tell you that we have to be very attentive to the territories that are adjacent to the territories where situation is controlled by the Russians. We're talking about executive discipline, about patriotism, about the activity of political parties, and we think that Kherson region is vulnerable region. There's a lot of patriots there, but still there's not enough of them to radically change the situation in the society, especially among those who have the authority there. Matter is that many people there have repainted themselves, but they have not changed, and as a result of last elections, they came back to power. I talked to some of them, and in a friendly way, I said that they won't be allowed to do what they did before 2014 and during the first months of the Russian occupation of Crimea. That's why we table some proposals to the president about the strengthening of the executive power, and we hope that the president will confirm and accept our proposals that are aimed at the strengthening of the Ukrainian power in those regions. Could you be more precise for the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center how well felt the support and understanding is felt on the side of Crimean Tatars and pro-Ukrainian patriots on the territory of Peninsula? I ask for your attention. Please tell this in a sincere way. If among politicians and officials we had contradicting approaches to this event, praise God, in the Ukrainian society, at least in the forms that we feel, we had, as I think, 100% support. This is such a level of patriotism, and when I talk about the problem of the return of Crimea being a problem of just Crimean Tatars, I addressed this remark to politicians, not to the society. If tomorrow someone will demonstrate any doubt in the belonging of Crimea to Ukraine, then we will have a new Maidan. And of course, I want to thank Ukrainian television because it is seen, it is being watched in Crimea. The ATR, Crimean Tatar channel, had a lot of calls from Crimea, from people who said that they will be patient and they will endure in order to come back to Ukraine. So I want to thank Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars and other people and other patriots in spite of Russia. And you know, there are such people who gathered among the activists of blockade. You know, they are Ukrainians of various ethnic origins. I am very grateful to them. Thank you, Refat. For today, our working day is over. Just one remark. Refat mentioned his compatriot Sevgil Musayeva in her blog asked Mr. Kononenko not to comment on the Crimean issue, and the schedule for tomorrow will be published on our site in the evening. Thank you very much. Goodbye.